Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park, and we bring you our next episode where we find out that there's a hustler in the streets. And so I was wondering, Jamae, if you were in this situation and you were in Sunja's shoes, what would be your hustle?
I mean, I would try to figure out how to cook. I would do street food. Because, frying is easy, and everyone loves fried foods, and everyone needs to eat, so why not street food?
Alright, so what is the street food you would do?
I'm thinking of, pancakes, either pajon, or I don't know if they made okonomiyaki in this particular part of Japan, but pancake food.
Okay, so not even deep frying then?
No, absolutely not.
Like pan frying?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I feel like if I was in her shoes, I would want to be a seamstress. I want to learn how to sew and make all the clothes. Feel like nobody goes nude, so that thing is always going to be in business.
For sure.
And I feel like if you're the best one in town, people will come up to you, and you get all the rich people, so you get all the rich people gossip.
Would rich people go to your home, considering where Sunja and Isak live?
True. I mean, hopefully, if I'm good enough, I have my own business, and I'm truly doing the hustle. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll wear more Japanese clothes. I'll sew myself more Japanese-looking clothes so that I can fit in better.
Totally. Would you wear city clothes or more traditional clothes?
I would wear whatever clothes makes me more money.
Well, what would you start with, considering if you were Sunja, you just moved to Japan or to Osaka?
I think the first investment would have to be, nice clothes, right? A lot of people tend to judge a business based off of the looks of it. So then if you look nice, people are going to want to come and see your tailoring.
Right. But traditional versus city clothes, they both can be nice. What are you gravitating towards?
Oh, traditional versus modern clothes?
Right.
Oh, I don't know. I'd probably go modern. I like modern clothes.
For sure. And I'm thinking that traditional wear might be very specific.
Okay. Let's go on to our recommendation for the week.
Alright, for our recommendation for the week, I'm recommending the work of Yumi Sakugawa. She is an artist, an author, and an illustrator. What I appreciate about her work is that she creates spaces for creativity and humanity in ways that are grounded in reality. Some of her work includes books like Your Illustrated Guide to Becoming One with the Universe, The Little Book of Life Hacks, and by the time this episode comes out, their newest work, There Is No Right Way to Meditate. All really well illustrated books. She also hosts webinars, such as one that I personally attended, which is called Your Creative Energy is an Erotic Spell, How to Harness Pleasure, Power, and Ritual in Manifesting Your Ideas into Reality. I appreciate how she builds community within these webinars, but also builds community within her Instagram page, which you can find at Yumi Sakugawa, YumiSakugawa, and also her work can be found on her website at yumisakugawa.com. Both of these links will be in the description.
Yep, and that's our recommendation for the week. Alright, we're into our second read of Pachinko by Minjin Lee. So, Jamae, do you want to recap on what happened last time?
Yes, so last time we started reading Pachinko, we were introduced to Sunja and her family. Huni, her father, who was disabled but was kind-hearted and had a really good reputation in her community, who unfortunately passed away. And her mother, Youngjin, who she works with to continue hosting people in their boarding house. And we were also introduced to Hansu, who was this player, definitely not great moves and grooming Sunja with his twice her age daddy mentality and impregnates her. Sunja gets mad at him and she's like, I don't want to be your mistress, and finds a husband in Isak who is a pastor, a sickly pastor, who is traveling through town and gets sick, gets nursed back to life by Youngjin and Sunja, and feels that it is his obligation to marry Sunja so that she has a better life, so that her child will have a name, a family name attached to theirs, and they go off to Osaka.
So the last they left off, they were leaving Korea, they were leaving Busan, and Youngjin was saying bye to both Isak and Sunja.
Yes.
Now where we start off on chapter 12 of book 1 is exactly that. So now we are on the other side of the sea. I think it's a sea. Is it a sea?
Well, it's got to be a sea. They board a ferry.
Yeah. We're on the other side of a body of water, and here we find Yoseb waiting for Isak and Sunjin to come.
And who's Yoseb?
So Yoseb is Isak's brother, who is the whole reason why Isak went on this journey to get all the way to Osaka.
Upon Isak and Sunja's arrival, we notice that there's a lot of culture shock. Although Korea is being colonized by Japan and there are a lot of Japanese people in Korea, it's totally different being away from their homeland. And what are some things that showed us the culture shock with Isak and Sunja's arrival, specifically for Sunja?
Right. I mean, the first is where they move into. So Isak and Sunja, their immediate plan is to live with Yoseb and Kyunghee, who's Yoseb's wife. And Isak's plan is to make enough money so that they could eventually move out. Now, the culture shock comes in the fact that when they move into the place, which is Ikaino, they find out...
Like the specific village.
Right. They find out how miserably Koreans are living in Japan.
Right. Like, even though Yoseb and Kyunghee are technically living comfortably, quote unquote, in this village, comfortably doesn't really look comfortable.
Right. To quote the paragraph where I think Min-jin Lee does such a great job of painting this picture, she talks about it this way. Ikaino was a misbegotten village of sorts, comprised of mismatched shabby houses. The shacks were uniform in their poorly built manner and flimsy materials. Here and there, a stoop had been washed or a pair of windows polished, but the majority of the facades were in disrepair. Matted newspapers and tar paper covered the windows from inside, and wooden shims were used to seal up the cracks. The metal used on the roof were often rusted through. The houses appeared to have been put up by the residents themselves using cheap or found materials, not much sturdier than huts or tents. And then she kind of goes into it a little bit further, but at the end she writes about a small boy defecating by a stoop near Yoseb's house. So I think another way to even look at it is kind of like the Korean ghettos in Japan.
I mean, when I read this portion, it reminds me of some parts of Philippines now, in that there are places where there are squatters, and there are places where people just build makeshift homes because their land was taken from them, or their family no longer is alive to help them. So definitely not a great neighborhood, but it is people making do with what they've got.
Right.
I think another thing is, not only is this neighborhood looking not great, that another part of the culture shock is that Yoseb warns both Isak and Sunja not to interact with the neighbors. Even though they are Korean. Don't interact with anyone, because if you do, they're going to come running to us. They're going to want money. They're going to want food. And they're going to want help. Again, this reminds me of the Philippines, where my parents would tell me, don't help anybody, even if they ask for a little bit of money. If you give one person money, everyone else is going to come running to you. Right.
And on the other side of it, I think the reason why Yoseb has to tell Isak this is, one is Isak's a very trusting person.
Right.
But two is that I know from my perspective of things and seeing what my parents did coming to America as immigrants, they always trusted Korean people. So if they needed their cars fixed, if they need a new roof or whatever it is, like the first call that they would make is to the Korean company. And it always is seemingly the thought that Koreans would always help each other.
Right.
But even from what's happened in our lives, we've been duped and scammed by Koreans too. So I think Yoseb has lived in this world long enough, and desperation sometimes overcomes the nature of helpfulness.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's overtaking the nature of Korean pride and that shared collectiveness through race and culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about Isak and his trusting nature, we also found that Isak arrived here not even thinking about wages when he was going into work.
Right.
And this is another part of the culture shock, because the head pastor, who is his boss, was kind of surprised that Isak didn't ask about wages.
Right.
And then now I think Isak's frame of mind shifted because he realized where his brother and his sister-in-law are living, realizing that only his brother is making money.
Right.
So now he has to figure out, well, what is he gonna do?
Right. So let's back it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So what happens is Isak has had this plan to come join up with Joseph, but his plan was to start at this church where he meets Pastor Yu and his
assistant pastor Hao.
Right.
Or Hu. Sorry.
Hu.
Pastor Hu.
So that's when we find out that he hasn't really thought about money. Pastor Yu has even mentioned that he has heard stories of Isak and how much money his family has.
Yeah.
So the thought was that he could help the church by bringing Isak in because he probably won't have to worry about money.
Right.
Which is absolutely not the case, which is what Isak finds out when he moves into Akaino.
Right. And not only does he not have family support, essentially Yoseb is the one supporting his family back home.
Right. And not only his family, but also
Kyunghee's family. Yeah. Right. So much money going out, not enough coming in.
Right.
Another thing, I don't think is particularly culture shock because they also come from a patriarchal society, but I think, at least from the way I read it, it seems as though the patriarchy is strong in this country. Oh yeah,
and I don't think it's just this country. I think, at least what I know of, a lot of Southeast Asian cultures or South Asian cultures, patriarchy not only was but still reigns pretty strong within like the nature of the household.
Absolutely. And it's the same in the US.
Right.
And I think for those of us who are first gen children of immigrants, we are in this double patriarchy. But that's for another episode. That's for a different conversation. In the book, what are some of the things that stood out to you in terms of how misogynistic and patriarchal the community is?
So, I mean, one of the first things is just talking about, as Sunja enters this society, she only knows Isak, Yoseb, and Kyunghee.
Right.
Kyunghee's super excited because she hasn't had any other females to talk to.
Yep.
And so she's seeing Sunja as this sister that she can start to embrace, and also having this child that Kyunghee is unable to have with Joseph.
Right.
So they start going into more things together. They start going shopping together. And in these experiences, we find out that Kyunghee has been wanting to start this kimchi business to make money for the household.
Yeah, she says she wants to be the kimchi ajumma.
Right. And she wants to send money back to her home, like to her parents and things like that. But the limiting factor is Yoseb.
Right. Yoseb says that she can't work, especially not working outside, because, and this drives me nuts, is because he wants her to, quote unquote, stay pretty.
Right. Right.
I think she'll still be pretty regardless of where she's working.
And I think the next big one is the thing we find out pretty immediately after that, which is this knock on the door that we get while Kyunghee and Sunja are at home, but everyone else is out.
Right. Everyone else is working.
Right.
Yoseb and Isak are at their respective workplaces.
Right. And then who are these people?
These are the the moneylenders, or at least the loan sharks who are trying to collect for the lender.
That Kyunghee and Sunja knew about, right?
No.
Right.
Only this was Yoseb. Yoseb's secret. Yoseb is the one who made this deal. And talking about Koreans trusting other Koreans, Yoseb borrowed money from this really, I guess, well-to-do Korean.
I don't know if he's well-to-do or not, but he's definitely just like a loan shark. So like this is his business, is to lend money and then collect interest.
Right. And so, because Sunja, I think this is where Sunja really shines, in that when these loan sharks come to collect, she's the one who quickly thinks on her feet. She's the one who said, how much is the total amount? She's like grilling these loan sharks, like, how much do we need? No, what is the total amount? And she's even the one who's like, come back later, I'll get the money. And what she does next is what shows like her true character. Like, even though she is carrying Hansu's child, even though she really had feelings for Hansu, the fact that she used the pocket watch that he gave her and pawned it off in order to pay this debt shows that she truly wants to move on and she truly wants to help this household.
For me, I saw it a little bit differently. So this is where the ghost of Huni comes back in, and the presence of her mother still is there. So
absolutely,
one of the things that Sunja talks about is that she remembers her father talking about loan sharks and people like this, and how much interest can truly
debilitate people.
Right. So with these debt collectors coming in, that's one of the biggest things she thinks of, is not only is it just about paying back the loans, which Kyunghee doesn't even like fully understand, but soon just like this money's going to keep getting bigger. Like, how did he even get to it? Like 217 or 220 yen.
Right.
Like, how did it get there in the first place? And it's because it started out like 130 and like now we're here.
Yeah.
So I think the watch bit is a part of maybe moving on from Hansu, but it's much more of a fact of her just knowing that she needs to get things done to make sure that the household can stay intact.
Absolutely. She was such a boss.
Yeah.
She like commanded the situation. She's like, no, you are not going to tell me that it's only this much. You're not going to tell me that
So you're talking about when she goes to the pawn shop.
No, like even to the loan sharks. Like the loan sharks were like, oh, it's only this much. And she asked for the total. She's like, what's the total? Don't tell me the interest. Don't tell me just this little amount that needs to be paid now.
Yeah.
Tell me what's the total.
Right. And then when she does go to the pawn shop, that's pretty much what she does too.
Absolutely. She's like, I know this is worth a lot and I'm not going to budge. Even though the broker was lowballing her, she was like, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to leave. And she wasn't acting. She was like, I truly am just not going to continue dealing with you if you're not going to pay what it's worth.
Which talks a lot about Sunja's actual character.
Yeah.
Which is weird because she grows up in such a small town, and if we look at the first read of how Sunja grew up, this is not the character that I thought would have come out of this. Like, she seemed very meek. She seemed in the shadow of her mother. It didn't seem like this person who honestly quite ready to step out independently into the world. As soon as she's gone to Osaka, she's pretty much led the household with making sure that they're not in debt, and then making sure that they're going to be somewhat protected, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And the idea that I'm coming from when I'm saying that she's trying to separate herself from Hansu is like, she has other jewelry that she could have sold, but she chose to sell this one first. And when I first read the first few chapters, I thought that she wasn't going to get rid of it. I thought she was going to hold on to it, and that it was going to be the last thing she sold. But the fact that it was the first thing she sold, I'm like, girl, you are a boss. You are totally embracing your life with your current family rather than thinking about the what ifs. And I agree. I thought she was going to be meek throughout. I thought she was going to take the back seat. But I think the fact that Kyunghee showed nervousness and the only other person she could rely on was herself, and remembering how her father and how her mother reacted to situations, I think her parents had such a level-headedness to a lot of things, and like a way of, specifically with Huni, he had a way of speaking to other people, and that Sunja was always with Huni. It was bound to happen that she was going to take charge. Maybe not in a very powerful way, but in a way that shows that she's not to be trifled with.
Well, I think that's even where, looking back at Sunja's development and how they raised her, it was the fact that Huni never talked to her like she was lesser than.
Right.
Like, he talked to her as someone that he knew had to be a part of society. Then when Huni passed away, Sunja saw her mother take up this business, which is not what a lot of women did.
Right.
And then was able to run it and be successful with it. So I think the first few chapters set it up so that we saw the background of what Sunja saw growing up and seeing the role models that were placed upon her, which now, moving to Japan, gives her the space to start growing and being independent and showing what she can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, unfortunately, is undermined by Yoseb after she pays the debt. And not only does she have the foresight to not just give the money to the debt collectors, that she's like, no, take me to the person who's going to notarize and say that the debt is clear. So we don't have to just trust your word.
Right.
So even after she's gone through this whole ordeal, when Yoseb comes home, and on page 140 of the physical paperback, this is what he says about them. Yoseb says, "Stupid women, every time I walk down the street, how am I supposed to face these men again, knowing that some foolish woman paid my debt? My nuts are shriveling." I'm like, the ego is fragile.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, within the society of what Yosef grew up in, it definitely makes sense with how he feels.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right, but
no.
I think this characterization shows more the men in this period of time rather than who Yosef is. I think Yosef is kind of like this character of what most Koreans are kind of thinking and utilizing, because he even talks a lot about just surviving and survival, and we'll kind of talk about it as we look into the read going even into book 2. But Yosef's main thoughts are, how do I survive, how do I get by, which is not the same thoughts as I think any of the other characters that we're currently reading.
Totally. So Yosef is being molded by the society he's in.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely. For sure. So, besides the culture shock and besides the patriarchy, there is one other thing that happens in these last few chapters.
Yeah. What I wrote is, let me shuffle through my notes here.
And for those of you who are following along in the book, it's at the end of chapter 13.
Yes. So this is verbatim of what I wrote. Isak and Sunja, do it!
So, while I was reading this part of the chapter, I was reading it through audiobook while I was driving. And when I got to this part, I literally almost swerved.
Oh no.
And thankfully, I was near a parking area, so I was able to park, but I was blushing while parking.
Wow.
Because, I don't know, I couldn't stop the book. I was like, I'm just gonna keep listening.
So this is the same guy that last time, if we could go back.
Yeah.
You weren't really very fond of Isak's character.
Well, I wasn't fond of his character because he didn't just own up to wanting to marry this person because it was something he wanted, instead of placing all of the reasoning on God.
But I still feel like this wasn't what Isak was expecting when he agreed to marry Sunja.
For sure.
It's even in the description of how he came to want to start that touch.
Right.
It didn't seem like it was the thought process of oh, I knew I was going to do this, or I've been waiting to do this with her. It seemed very natural and a progression. It's like, oh, we're already married, and I guess this is what we do. And so then it progressed to what it became, but it didn't seem like he was some creepy person just like waiting and ready to pounce upon it.
For sure. And like when Sunja, in the same chapter, in the same scene, when it went into Sunja's perspective, I think it was so necessary and also so endearing that she compares Hansu's fervor versus Isak's gentleness.
Yeah, I like Isak.
I do. I mean, I appreciate Isak now.
Right. Okay, and then because of this, I was going to say fornication, but a better word is...
lovemaking?
Sure. So because of this encounter, we get to most of what happens in the first book, except there's one other major thing that happens before we end book 1 of 3 of Pachinko.
Yes, and that is that Sunja gives birth.
Yep, and so like we talked about a second ago, Yoseb is angry at the ladies for going and getting the money to pay off his loan debt.
Right, so not only getting the money, but also paying off the loan, so it's like a double whammy for him.
Right, and what you didn't see was a giant eye roll as I said that.
Yes.
But, so he was angry, he stormed off, but as he was gone and away, this is where maybe the stress had something to do with it.
I think so.
Yeah, but this is where Sunja goes into labor. So her water breaks and she gives birth to this child. Now, because of this incident, I think this leads Yoseb to want to make up and become family again. I do think this occurrence does drive the forgiveness that Yoseb gives to them, which is kind of silly, but...
kind of begrudgingly gives to them, and I feel like this forgiveness is a small forgiveness.
I don't know. I think it was genuine, and I think the thing that put a stamp on it was the fact that Isak told Yoseb that he wanted Yoseb to name the child. Now, do you remember the name that Yoseb gave to the child?
Yes, he gave the child the name Noah.
Right. And so Yoseb's explanation for giving the name Noah was, one is that it's biblical, which seems to be Isak and Yoseb. But the other reason is, and these are quotes, because he obeyed and did what the Lord asked. Noah, because he believed when it was impossible to do so. When I read this line, I could feel the weight of the words that came through with this name. I think Noah is going to have such a big role in this. And I think these two things, is that he obeyed and that he believed when it's impossible to do so, are going to be a major theme throughout the rest of this book.
Totally. So that brings us to book 2.
Right.
And in book 2, it fasts forward a few years.
Right.
In that, the opening scene, we find out that Isak got arrested.
Right.
Because of his co-worker, who is the assistant pastor, Pastor Who.
Who?
His name is Who.
Yes.
During the obligatory bowing to the Shinto shrine.
Right.
Apparently, this pastor was murmuring the Lord's Prayer under his breath, which is not allowed.
Right.
And because he was fervent in being of the Lord, he said, I am going to be like Shadrach, Isak, and Abednego, and I'm going to go through the fire. For those of you who are not familiar with this story, essentially, these 3 go into a furnace because they want to serve the Lord.
Right. So the characters who have now been arrested are Isak, Who, and
you.
Me?
No, his name is you.
Oh, yes. So Pastor Yu, Who, and Isak. But the other thing that happens is that as Yoseb is going to see Isak in prison, he passes by Noah, who's now about 6.
6 years old, yeah.
And then Noah's holding something.
Yeah, his little brother.
Yeah.
Mozasu.
Yeah. So we've now been introduced to this second brother who just appeared. I'm assuming I think it's Isak and Sunja's baby. I don't think there's any questions on that, right?
There is no question because we are later told how they've tried many times and she's lost pregnancies.
Right. Oh, right.
And then Mozasu happened.
Right. Which, is that a biblical name?
Yes, Moses.
Oh. Is that how Koreans say it?
I don't know, but that's what I was thinking because I'm pretty sure Isak is Isaac.
Yeah.
Isaac. Yoseb is Joseph. Noah is Noah.
Yeah.
And Mozasu sounds like Moses.
Or is it like... Because there's like that accent that people do with like Koreans and they're like, Osu. It's like, is it like Moses?
Maybe. But I'm just pronouncing it the way it's said in the audiobook.
I know. Interesting. Okay. So, Mozasu.
Also, it could be the fact that they made it more Japanese.
Oh, right.
Because they are in a kaino, and like it's explained to us, all of them have Japanese names on their papers.
Because they had to do that.
Right, and maybe they like skipped ahead and were like, let's just name him with the Japanese characters.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so Isak's in prison, and that starts to have Sunja thinking, because she is very much accepted into this family of Yoseb and Kyunghee.
Right.
But she doesn't know how that stays if Isak passes away.
Right.
Because of that, Sunja is starting to become more independent.
Or she's now feeling more bold in trying to find work.
Right.
Because she's thinking, if I can't rely on Yoseb to take care of me if Isak passes away, I need to have money of my own.
Right. And so Sunja starts a business. It's the kimchi peddling business that is Kyunghee's idea.
Right.
But I think they're starting to work hand in hand because Kyunghee's helping out with the business.
Yes.
She's still staying within the boundaries that are created by Yoseb.
Right. She's still staying at home, but she is the one helping with the kimchi.
Right. And the thing is, Yoseb can't say anything because they're in such a hard spot without Isak's money.
Exactly.
He's working 2.5 jobs, and they later explain it as the fact that he can't even make half the money that another Japanese warehouse manager-y person, I forget the actual title that they said, but he's just not making the money that he needs to.
Right.
And so there's nothing that he can say to stop Sunja from making money to actually help out with the household.
Yeah, exactly. And this first venture, when she's selling at the market at the train station, Minjin Lee makes the point that not everyone who's Korean is going to be welcoming because Sunja tries to park her cart next to people with open spots. And these people are like those who are selling doenjang or those who are selling food. And she thinks that, it's going to be a nice match because food with food, and they're all within the same palette. But with each person she goes to, they get meaner and meaner until she's at the farthest reaches of the market and ends up having to park her cart next to a couple of butchers.
Right. Who are Japanese.
Yeah.
But they ended up being
really
way
nice
more
to
accepting.
Her.
Yeah. And they even bought her kimchi. They ate it, said it was really good.
Yeah.
But the thing is, her business didn't start out booming.
No.
She was able to raise her voice, but then she had to divert her eyes because she just didn't have any confidence.
Right.
But once that Japanese butcher bought the kimchi and told her it was good, that's what kind of switched it around. And I think she said something like, I'm not going back home until I empty out everything that I have.
Exactly.
Right. So then we see her business start to blossom and bloom.
Pick up, yeah.
Right, so she's able to sell way more kimchi, but obviously it takes time to make it.
Yeah.
The other thing she runs into is a problem of finding the cabbage to make kimchi.
Yeah, because it becomes so expensive and it's like hard to find.
Right, so then she gets a second cart where she makes candies and other things like that when she doesn't have kimchi.
Right.
Then comes along a new character, which is Kim Chang-ho. And this is a guy who's very persistent.
Yes. he approaches her and asks her, when are you making your kimchi? I tried it before and it's really good.
Well, I don't think he did say he tried it before.
Someone tried it.
Yeah, he's never tried the kimchi before, which is a crazy thing. And we come to that later on in the story. Mm-hmm. He just says, I need your kimchi. When is it ready?
Right.
Tell me when you have your kimchi. And just like asks like multiple times.
Right. And then she asks, how much do you want? And he's like, the whole batch.
Yeah. And then the reason is?
Because he wants to sell it at his yakiniku restaurant.
Right. So he offers Sunja this business proposal of bring me all the kimchi that you have and I'll buy it all out.
Yes.
And so once that kimchi is ready, that next batch that she was gonna, I think she was gonna sell it over 3 weeks or something. It was gonna be a long period of time.
Right.
She goes to the restaurant, making sure to bring Kyunghee with her, and Mozasu comes too.
Yes.
Chilling on the chest.
Yes, with the little wrap.
Yes. So they go to the restaurant, and this is another part where Kyunghee is very sure that she's not disobeying Yoseb, and she's like, I need to stay outside so I can say that I didn't go in.
Right.
But this makes it for Sunja to have to go into the restaurant by herself, which is her first level of discomfort. Then she goes in there, tries to find Changho, who's not there. And like, so she goes through several layers of discomfort until she finally gets to see Changho, who offers her this position at her restaurant to make kimchi.
Yes. Full time. Yes.
He does say that Kyunghee also needs to come along with her.
Right, because it's such a big task to take on. There's so much kimchi that he wants to sell with his food that Sunja by herself couldn't do it.
And he also owns like 2 other restaurants on top of the one that he has.
Exactly, and so he's not just selling for this restaurant, it's for all the restaurants.
Right, and so he offers her everything that she needs. Like, she's like, I need to figure out what to do with my baby. She's like, just
bring
him
child
here. Yeah, and then the other kid, if he's out, just bring him here too.
Right.
And he also offers her wages that are pretty much double what Yoseb is making through his 2.5 jobs. So she is now going to be able to bring in the money that's necessary, especially with Isak gone, but just way more money than they've had before.
Right.
Everything is looking pretty good until we get to the next chapter.
Yeah.
It seems all honky-dory.
Or at least as honky-dory as it can be.
And then we step into the eyes of Noa.
So Noa one day returns home. He's looking for his snack because Mama made a snack for him. Always ready for him after school. And he finds someone at the doorway. And when he's describing this person, even though this person looks really gaunt, really gray hair, long hair, beard, doesn't smell good. Even when he's describing the way the person looks, I already knew that it had to be Isak.
Yes, I know. I knew it couldn't be anyone else.
Right.
And it was wild to think that Noa, who really hadn't known his father for very long, but no one knew, like, from his heart that this was actually his dad. It wasn't like, oh, you're a creepy stranger trying to, like, convince me or something. Like, he knew that it was his dad.
Right. And before this, we know that Noa was saying to himself that he doesn't even remember what his dad looks like.
Right.
But in this instance, through Noah's eyes, he says that he remembers the way his voice sounds.
Right.
And the voice sounds like his father.
Right. I think the other things that are important to recognize about Isak's appearance is that Pastor Yu and Hu have both passed away in jail. And the other thing they mention is that most prisoners get sent home to pass away because they don't want them to pass away in jail.
Prison,
So it's not like he showed up because all of a sudden things were humane. It was likely, and from the telling of it, maybe because Isak is on his deathbed.
Right.
Which he's been there before.
Right. But also, this is way worse. His face is scaly. And we already know that Isak is a sickly person.
Right.
His face is scaly. There's a sour smell.
Right.
And he's lying on the floor. He can't even get up.
Right. So in the last chapter that we've read, Isak is being tended to by Sunja, who comes home.
Yeah.
One of the other sweet moments is that Yoseb comes back, and he Yoseb also goes through this debate of
should he leave work?
Right, and this is once again where we see Yoseb's character and the characterization of, I think, the Korean community in this very specific role of I can't leave my work. I know I'm going to get fired and we need this money.
Right.
So even with his brother on his deathbed, he tells Noah to go back home because he needs to finish work. And I think we should spend a little bit more time diving into it, but there's this very sweet moment where Yoseb comes back and they need to shave Isak's beard because he has lice in it.
Right.
And Noah's the one person that can do this.
Right.
And so I think that gave Yoseb the sense of belonging and being in the care of Isak, and I thought that was very sweet to include in this story.
In the care of Isak?
Yeah, like the care that they're
Caring
giving
for
to
Isak.
Isak. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
totally. Yeah, and although Noah was initially shocked by the appearance of his father, after that he was so level-headed, which I think is so different for such a young child. And I mean, it could be the time, it could be the place, it could be the context of it all. But also just knowing how sweet of a child he was and how he now is this very calm and tranquil little boy.
Right. So let's talk about Noah, because he's almost absolutely, I can guarantee you that Noah's going to be a giant character in the story.
Yeah, definitely.
One is that we know that he's not Isak's child.
Right.
But all the treatment, if we didn't know the story beforehand, I don't think that would be the assumption that I make based off the family that I see.
Absolutely.
The other things that we know is that at school he's getting bullied constantly, and so while his mom Sunja is starting this kimchi business, he smells like kimchi, and so all the kids are making fun of him, calling him like garlicky and things like that. He's able to shrug it off somewhat. He seems very independent. He seems like a very strong person for as young of a child as he is. He's a model student at the top of his class. He seems like a very good brother. But the thing that kind of got to me a little bit is there's so much internalization of all the things that he's seeing, which is why I think he's maturing the way that he is.
Right. His thought processes are beyond his years.
Right, absolutely.
Right, and like one of the thoughts that he has and that he knows he cannot share is that he wishes he were Japanese so that he couldn't be bullied.
Right, and like even to the point where one of his teachers says to him that he needs to teach other fellow Koreans to be quote-unquote good children of the benevolent emperor. And I think he even has this moment where he's like, us, like Koreans, like his thoughts are very much surpassing his age.
Right. Definitely.
There's also a moment where it was one of the last things that happened in the chapters that we read, but Isak talks to Noah, and this is when Noah says that he doesn't want to go to school because he wants to be with his father.
Right, because he knows that things are bad.
Right, and they even mention, like, Noah never misses school. Like, he goes to school every single time. But Isak turns to Noah and says, quote unquote, "You are brave, Noah, much more braver than me. Living every day in the presence of those who refuse to acknowledge your humanity takes greater courage." I mean, there's no way that this is the first time Noah's been taught things like this. Just like we saw Sunja being the character that she is to start to lead this household. I think Noah is now a product of Sunja, who's a product of Hoonee and Youngjin, who's a product of the parents of Hoonee. So, I mean, we are maybe a little bit over a third of the book through, but we have now seen this lineage of where Noah, this character that we didn't even know about coming into this story, like we now see where this character has come from and how this strength is built. Clearly there's much more to be done. And Noah, I'm sure, is going to go through more struggles. But it's so beautiful and sweet to see this kid that is present in front of us.
Yeah, definitely. Which makes me a little afraid for him. Knowing what Sunja's gone through. And now what Noah is witnessing in front of him already. I'm a little afraid, but also very proud of what Sunja and Isak were able to build in order to give this foundation for Noah. On
the other side of things, so Yoseb, a character that we've talked about quite often. What have you thought of his character and his character development so far?
So, like we talked about already, I think his character is very fluid and is built by his surroundings. Like, he's not sure of himself outside of his faith. And beyond his faith, he is just pleasing either his Koreanness or trying to please those who are watching him, which are the Japanese people or his Japanese boss and the Japanese society as a whole.
Right. So I think of him as subservient, a citizen, a follower, and maybe, to put it harshly, a coward.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
I do think it's important to note that it doesn't ever make Yoseb a bad person. And this is why I say it's a characterization of what the society is.
Right.
But he's a great husband because as much as the boundaries that he sets, when Kyunghee talks about him, she constantly mentions that he is the person that she wants to be with. He's very loving. She would never want to be with anyone else. And like from the little journeys and things that Kyunghee goes on, she's described as hot. Like, in very plain words, they're like, this lady is hot.
Right.
Like, she makes Sunja look not good. And
damn it. She makes Sunja disappear. Not that she doesn't look good, but nobody sees her anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and Sunja was like, Hansu saw Sunja.
And was like, thought that she was really pretty.
Right.
And Isak thought the same thing too.
Right. So for Kyunghee to do this, and then we saw that one scene in the butcher shop. Yeah, where Kyunghee like draws the eyes of the other men that are there, and she like, I don't know, it was probably more the conversation, but she like woos the butcher into giving her free meat and stuff like that.
But she didn't mean to. She was trying to reject
it. Absolutely. But that's what I mean. Like, even to the point where she was like, no, like I don't need like free stuff. But okay, so Kyunghee's hot, and then like for her to understand and to fully think of Yoseb as this person who's taking care of her and like giving to her, like Yoseb also is taking care of his parents. He also took on the debt that we had to pay the loan collectors.
Right.
He took on that debt to bring Isak
and
to
Sunja,
him, which he does mention is a little bit selfish because he wanted that contact with his brother.
Right.
But I'm sure he's an amazing person, and if you see him from the outside, he's very, very amazing and sweet. Patriarchal, yes, but very, very loving and sweet. But it's that cowardice. It's the feeling that he needs to be a soldier in this general army of life. There's even a point, because we know that their oldest brother also passed away from the movement that they were on, right? So there's a point where he mentions, and this is a quote from Yoseb, which says, he didn't see any point of anyone dying for his country or for some greater ideal. He understood survival and family. And I think that describes him so perfectly of who he is and what his ideals are going to be. And I think somewhat fluid, but I think that's going to stay consistent.
Totally.
He's like, if I can support my family and we're staying alive, then that's all that matters.
Right.
Whereas we look at Sunja, even Isak, like Isak's whole thing, and one of the things that drew me to him as the husband of Sunja immediately is that Yoseb's first story of Isak in our book is that he would starve so that he could feed the other staff and the staff around his house, right? Like,
right.
So he is this very giving and loving person. So when we look at Isak, his whole goal is to give and love, like to the point where he's going to move to an entire country without knowing what his wages are going to be. Very idealistic to a fault. But very giving. We look at Sunja and we see this heart of wanting and making sure that not only survive but thrive,
and care,
and even Kyunghee has these big dreams, like she's a very strong and powerful person, but then Yoseb, who is supposed to be the head of his household, is like the one that's kind of like tamping it down, which who knows, is that bad or good? We're looking at this story that's fictional and uncertain. But survival isn't a bad thing and family isn't a bad thing.
Totally.
So it's kind of this counter of what's good or what's bad. I don't know.
I don't think it's either good or bad. I just think that it depends on whose good is it, who is benefiting from it.
One of the other things I did want to mention is that I've been having a hard time with writing notes with this book. I think for the other books that we've done so far, I've been able to write notes as we go.
Totally.
And I'm able to highlight these points and kind of move on. And like, so I'm finding a lot of things. I'm having so much trouble doing that with this book, and it's because this book is so beautifully written.
Yes.
Everything has this like really beautiful flow, so I'm like drawn into this story, and I'm like, I don't feel like I can just pull off to the side of the road when things get heated.
Right, exactly. Wait, so that I didn't stop. I couldn't stop reading. I just had to pull over. Not that my mind wasn't pulled over. I had to physically pull over, or else I would run into things.
Right. So, I don't know. I very much appreciate just the fluidity of the story. Yeah. The other thing that I really like that I wanted to mention is that none of the characters feel like they're dropped in like a Sims character. They're just, they appear.
Right.
When we see the restaurateur, Kim Chang-ho, he shows up ready to buy kimchi. So it's not like he's like, hi, I'm this person. He's like, hey, how much kimchi do you have? And we're like, who the heck is this person?
Exactly.
Like, kind of kimchi crack addict are you? And the other one is Mozasu. It's like, it started off book 2, we've advanced 6 years or so, or however long it was, and then Isak's like running, and he's like going to find my brother because no one else is home.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, Noah's holding a brand new baby.
Right.
I think that's such a subtle detail in the way that the story carries on, because it, once again, it never pulls me out of the story. It's like, oh, there's a new character. Mozasu's probably going to have a bigger role in this.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll split the seas or something, or carry the Korean Jews or something.
Right.
But I think it's written in such a beautiful way that it's hard for me to take away points and more just really want to read the story.
Right. It's also so much context and so many layers added into the story that you're right. I can't just stop in the middle and refigure out what happened. I have to like read it all the way through and then maybe have something to write.
Yeah. Okay. So we are kind of in the start of book number 2.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff that's happened, but also not that much stuff that's happened.
Right, in this particular part of the story.
Well, just kind of in general, like we've seen people grow up. We've seen them start to move into different positions. Like Sunja now has his job. Kyunghee's now more out of the house. We see Noah developing. But I don't think there's any peak or climaxes quite yet in my mind.
Right, because we're just starting out in this book.
Right, but we're a third through.
We're a third through of Pachinko, but in book 2,
I see.
We're in the first act of book 2.
Yes. So, knowing that Isak is in this tough spot, what are you predicting for the next read?
Okay, so this is my idealism at work. I think Isak's gonna pull through.
I think so too.
I'm like, if you and who died, but Isak is pulling through now, and he pulled through with tuberculosis with Sunja.
And the time before when he pulled through as a kid.
Right. I think there's got to be a magic number 3.
So maybe he is blessed.
Right, exactly. I think he's going to pull through, or at least I'm hoping he will.
Which does go into the story of, if we look at the character of Isak in the Bible, Abraham was meant to kill Isak.
Right.
But didn't.
Right.
I mean, it was divine intervention kind of things.
Sure.
But Isak survived.
Right.
So maybe that's his story. Because I also don't think that Isak's going to die.
Totally. I also think that Noah is going to keep internalizing. And I know he's a strong character, but he can't keep internalizing without output. So I don't know if that's going to come out as him acting out or if that's going to come out as him running away. Because there is this little part in the story where he talks about wanting to go to the beach and not tell anybody. So I don't know what that output is going to look like, but I think he's going to do something that might seem out of character.
Does anything happen with Sunja, Kyunghee, and the job? So let me put a caveat to that.
Okay.
So if we remember, one of Yoseb's things with being hesitant to let the women work there
right.
is that he knows this place. This is the place that he went to when he needed to grab the loans. So this is where the loan collectors go. Like, this is where bad people go to do business because the prices are waged that way for these restaurants.
Right.
So for me, what I was thinking is that is gonna come back and play somehow.
Right.
I don't know how, but this restaurant business, as wonderful as it is now,
True.
I think there's a descent.
There has to be a catch.
Yeah, there's no way that things are this easy and just gonna be cruising by.
Right. And now that you say that, I think the fact that Kim Chung-ho, because he's never tasted the kimchi and just brought Sunja in, I think somebody else is pulling the strings.
I am also thinking that Noah, something happens. Like, I think I am such a pessimist that for me, I'm like, this world is gonna burn down. Like, as soon as like everything started going well, I was like, what's gonna go bad? And then Isak's dying. I think things are gonna keep like fluctuating between good and bad.
Yeah.
But I do think that Isak's gonna pull through.
Totally.
That is the narrative of what his character is supposed to do.
Totally.
But at the same point, is if Isak pulls through,
a lot of bad things are gonna happen.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So for the next read, we're still in book 2. And we're reading through chapters 6 through 16. And for those who are following on the hardcover, and I realized this later because I'm following in the paperback. If you're following in the hardcover, the pages are 198 to 293. But for everyone, whatever medium you are using, it's from chapters 6 through 16 of book 2.
Right. And for anyone that wants to participate in the conversation, or if you want to let us know your thoughts on this, how can they reach us?
You can reach us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can interact in our posts or DM us while our DMs are still open on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep. And you can also reach us at our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com. We also have our bookstore in there where you can see what we're currently reading or other things that we have read or honestly plan to read.
Yeah.
But other than that, we'll continue with Pachinko. We have 3 more reads ahead before we finish the book. But until that, I don't know if I have time for an outro. I think we just have to book it. All right. Bye.